Hello, everyone, and welcome to Body of Correspondence, Finding Connections Through Letters. My name is Malahat. I am the stage manager for this event. I am pleased to welcome you to the 10th Annual World Writers Literary Festival, which is brought to you by Wordsworth Books, the Ball City School of International Affairs, and the New Quarterly Literary Magazine. Before we begin, I would like to extend our heartfelt thanks to our festival's donors and sponsors, including the Ontario Arts Council, the NAP Wealth Management Team of RBC Dominion Securities, and the Audi Kitchener-Waterloo. And now I'm pleased to introduce our moderator for this event. Vinh Nguyen is an educator and writer. His writings can be found in Brick, LitHub, the New Quarterly, and the Malahat Review. And now, to begin our festival, I will turn things over to Vinh, who will introduce Ivan and Brian.
Everyone. Thank you so much, Maha, for the introduction. And thank you everyone for sharing your Saturday afternoons with us. It's such a great pleasure to gather here this afternoon to celebrate Ivan and Brian, and to celebrate their beautiful and moving new books, Misconnections, a memoir in letters never sent, and Of Care, Letters, Connections and Cures. So if you don't yet have your copies, please rush out to your local independent bookshops to grab one for yourself. I promise that these books will delight your souls, enlighten your minds, and in the process also enlarge your hearts. They're amazing books, and I'm super grateful to have had the chance to read it. So I'm just now going to introduce our writers. Ivan Coyote is a writer and storyteller. Born and raised in Whitehorse, Yukon, they are the author of 13 books, the creator of 4 films, 6 stage shows, and 3 albums that combine storytelling with music. Coyote's books have won the ReLit Award, been named a Stonewall Honour Book, been longlisted for Canada Reads, shortlisted for the Hilary Weston Prize for Nonfiction, and awarded BC and Yukon Book Prize's inaugural Jim Deva Prize for Writing That Provokes. In 2017, Ivan was given an honorary Doctor of Laws from Simon Fraser University for their writing and activism. Brian Francis is the author of 3 novels, Fruit, a 2009 Canada Reads finalist, Natural Order, which was selected by the Toronto Star, Kobo, and Georgia Strait as the best book of 2011, and the YA novel Break in Case of Emergency, a finalist for the 2019 Governors General's Literary Awards. His latest book is Misconnections, a memoir in letters never sent, which was inspired by his play Box 4901. He lives in Toronto. So Brian and Ivan, I really couldn't put these books down and basically cried my way through every single page. They're so affecting, and there's just so much wisdom and pain and hope in them. And so I just really want to thank you for bringing these stories into the world. So as a way to begin, could you just briefly talk about your books and also your motivations for writing them? So I guess we'll start with Ivan.
Okay, hi Vin. Hi Brian. Hi everyone. Maha. And I just want to start by just saying that I'm here in on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, the Ottawa-Huron, and the Lenapehoik people, also known as London, Ontario. And yeah, and I'm happy to be here today and honored. And my motivations, I didn't start out to write a book of letters. I was actually just catching up on my email in the early days of the pandemic, when I didn't know what I was going to write about, to be honest with you. And it wasn't until partway through that I was on a panel, a queer memoir panel. And at the end, the host said, you know, what are you working on? And I said, well, I'm not really working on a manuscript. I was supposed to be writing this mystery novel, set it aside. And so I'm just answering letters. So write me a letter. And then I got an email from a editor a couple of days later asking me what I was doing with these letters. And I didn't really know. And they kind of went from there. So yeah, over to Brian.
Thank you, and also very happy to be here. And thank you for your kind words, Vin. That means a lot. So thank you for that. Writing memoirs is very personal. So when you hear that people connected with the books and the words, people that you didn't live your life, or people that you've never met, it does mean a lot. So thank you for that. In my instance, when I was 21, which was 29 years ago, which is really a little sobering to think about, because it was 1992 and that was 29 years ago. But in any case, I was going to university. I was in my third year, and I had just started the process of coming out. I was living in a house with 4 straight guys. They didn't know about me. And I had started just sort of dabble a little bit, I guess, and meet other queer people. And I was desperate to fall in love, I guess, at the time, or what I imagined love would feel like, because that had never happened to me. And I did what a lot of people did back in the day, before apps, before Grindr, before Tinder, before all these other apps. It was place an ad in the newspaper, in the classified section, in the personals section. So I placed an ad in the newspaper looking for love or connection or something. I don't really even know. I wasn't quite sure what I was looking for. And I heard back from maybe about a half dozen people who wrote me letters back, because that's how you responded to these classified ads, is you would write the personal letter back in response. And I met up with a few people, but there were no love connections, although it was an interesting experience for me. And there were 13 people that I never responded to, that I had kind of set them aside. At the time, they were too old because they were 30. Now, mind you, this is me at 21, right? So I just want to preface that by saying I'm like significantly older now, but in any case, or I just was very dismissive at that age, I think. But for whatever reason, I hung on to those 13 letters. I don't know why, but they went into a box and they kind of sat in a cardboard box under the stairs. And one day I was home from work and I was just rooting through some things, and I read these 13 letters again. And they sort of revealed themselves to me in a way they hadn't when I was 21. I certainly saw the vulnerability behind writing these letters. I certainly saw my own judgment in the way that, these letters were what I assumed about the people who were responding to me. And I asked myself, how would I respond to these letters now? Not as a 21-year-old just coming out, but now as a 50-year-old who is sort of very much at the midpoint in my life. So that's kind of the basis for Misconnections. It's me replying to responses that I got from a personal ad I placed almost 30 years ago, and what I have to say to those people now, but also what I have to say to myself at 21, because I think that was the person that I wanted to connect with more than anyone else.
Oh, thank you for those answers. Yeah, I mean, it sounded like, that both of these books came about in a very sort of organic way, right? That you didn't really have this kind of, goal set to kind of sit down and craft the book. It really was about catching up on emails, right? Or, rediscovering these letters that you had kept for some reason, that they were absolutely significant in some way. And so, I want to ask here a question about letters. And in particular, I'm interested in letters as writing prompts. In your books, letters, emails, messages, they all sparked something in you, right? Creating this desire for storytelling and self-reflection. And I know that there are probably many writers in this room right now who are always looking for writing prompts and inspiration, right? So could you comment on how someone else's writing, their letters addressed to you, functions as a tool or an invitation or an opening for your own writing? How it sort of catalyzes your own process of writing. So maybe Brian, you could go first.
Sure. I know for me, there was something in each of the letters when I went back and read these 13 letters again, that was kind of this creative springboard. There was one sentence, one minor comment that the writer put in the letter, and that was kind of my jumping off point in terms of how do I respond, or what is the one thing about this letter that I'm going to respond to, or what's sort of my entryway into this letter in terms of a response. So I guess for me, it's finding that word, that phrase, the uniqueness of the way that the person expresses themselves too, which I find everyone. I don't want to say that handwritten letters are significantly different than emails or text, because I'm not sure of that. But there is something about someone's there is a sense of more of intimacy, I think, to handwritten letters. And certainly there's a feeling that you get of the person's personality a little bit more through their handwriting, whether it's, written in a particular color. I think Ivan had mentioned in their book about different colors of pen that somebody had used, and it was kind of an opening, I think. And so that sense of personalization, I think, that comes with a handwritten letter, oftentimes is that connection that I know from myself that I'm looking for, to really be able to find that open door to connect literally with a stranger and try to find some common ground in spite of not knowing who the person is or anything about them, based other than what they've already included in their letter to me.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Much of what you said, I definitely rings true for me. For me, uh, I learned the reverence for the letter from my grandmother Patricia on my dad's side. She was a fantastic letter writer, and I've always revered the letter, and I kept up a ongoing correspondence with her from when I first left home when I was 15, and we wrote letters. And so some of the letters in care of actually went back to, I think the oldest one was 11 years old. And so I've kept for many, many years. I lost most of my snail mail letters and correspondence in a house fire in 2006, but I started again. And so I keep a file of special letters. So they've already connected on some level for me to have set them aside. And my idea was for years, that one day I would, in this magical future, I would have some time to sit down and go through them. And then, the global pandemic struck. And so I kind of had this time. So I went back through snail mail. I went to Vancouver to shut my apartment down. I had my special letters file. I scooped it up before I came back to Ontario in April of 2020. Because I was on the road when the pandemic hit, so I had to go back and close everything down. I had vegetables in my crisper and stuff. Anyway, I grabbed my special letters, and I had this. I had an email file of them, and I just started going through them. And then whichever one sort of jumped out at me was the one I picked. And what I would do is, like, I've taken to calling it radically reading it. Like, I would read it 20, 30 times over, and then just really sit with what I felt like the letter writer, what the essence of their question or story, like what the spine of it all was. And then I would take long walks around the marsh and take really long showers and walk the dog, and I would just be out, mostly outside in nature, and I would just wait until the response sort of shook loose, till the right path into my response to them hit me. And then I would sit down and really, it was a very it was a very thorough immersion. Sometimes I would spend 5 days on one letter, and some of them were quite long. And I would really live with that conversation in my bones as I was sort of crafting my response. I guess that was my process. And the letters to me, there's 21 letter writers. There's 21 letters in the book. One was to my deceased grandma. So there's 20 letters to me. I answered them in the order that the universe told me to. And so they appear in the book in the order, chronologically, in which they were responded to, not in which, but it's weird because they make their own pattern in there somehow. It was I wrote the whole thing pretty much from April 2020 to third week of September 2020, which for me was quite a jaunt, a writing jaunt. Yeah. And so I just really got inside it all, and I lived in my head. I was terrible on the road. I would just drive past every turn off. I would forget what I was doing. I would find the milk in the cupboard. I was very in my head. Yeah, that was my process.
That's so fascinating. I think both of these responses kind of make me think about the deep sort of attentiveness and care, right? Like the kind of the materiality of these pieces, or where they're coming from, who they're coming from, and really trying to really live with them. And so I mean, I think all of your responses are making me think about the deeply social core of memoir writing, right? Like that our stories kind of only come about through other people, right? That something like these letters can really draw out what we call memoir, or like what we call the personal kind of story. And there's such a kind of sense of intimacy. And so that kind of leads me into my next question. Right. So while I was reading your books, I was reminded of a quote by a Mexican film director, Alejandro González Iñárritu, where he claims that intimacy is the new punk. It's controversial and shocking, right? In our digital networked age. So we're more connected, but we're less intimate. Is the main idea. And so your books are just so punk to me, right? In that you kind of dare to respond and relate, to really reach out and reciprocate someone else's attempt to connect. And so could you reflect on how, for you, if writing is a process of establishing intimacy, right? Or how your books go about establishing or building this intimacy? I think that's very visceral, that can be really felt in the books. So Ivan, do you want to start?
Yeah, I guess I want to skip back a little bit and investigate this word memoir, which I don't use and I'm not a fan of. And I think about even nonfiction and how it's defined by what it isn't. It's kind of like non-binary in that way. So I don't think these are I don't know. I reject the label of memoir personally. I think yeah, so but intimacy, how do I it's interesting because for letters, it's it's second person. So it lends itself to intimacy regardless of who the reader is, right? And sometimes we write like to the universal you, right? In second person. In this case, for me, and I'll only speak to my process, I was writing specifically to a person. And at first it started out just as that. It was correspondence. And then as I became aware of it morphing into this manuscript, it became a you that was to a person, but in an intentionally shareable way. So what I had to navigate with was turning off the universal audience and still maintaining my conversation with the person. That was my aim. And so I can't speak to Brian, but I'm curious if you've heard from any of the actual letter writers or what that process was like. With mine, I contacted every one of them, except for with the exception of my deceased grandmother, who I'm in constant touch with. But I contacted them. I sent them their actual response, all by email, regardless. Some of them were, except for the anonymous S, which Brian, you made a reference to. That was just an anonymous signed the letter S note in 2 colors of blue ink, like they ran out, as opposed to like an artistic choice, I think. And they left it underneath the windshield wiper of my car after a gig. They must have seen me getting out of the car. Yeah. So then it became, what parts of your letter, is there anything that you need us to cut out? Do you want to change your name? So, yeah, so it was, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, Vin, and I'll stop rambling on and pass it off to Brian, but, yeah, I'll drop it there.
I know for myself, when it comes to intimacy, like it's like when you write, you can't be conscious of who's going to be reading it because you'll never write anything. Like I think for me, I was very comfortable writing this and being intimate and putting myself on the page. And then there's the months where the book is going to be coming out and you just sit there for myself and spin your wheels thinking about everybody that is going to read this, or maybe no one's going to read it. I mean, it's this catch-22, right? Where you want the book to be celebrated, you want the book to be widely read, a lot of work goes into it, but you're also afraid of who's going to read it as well, because you don't, for myself, I don't really think in the process of writing about what I'm putting on the page. It's only after the fact that I go, wow, I really revealed a lot about myself in this. And I mean, my background is fiction writing. And so you can always, for myself, I can kind of hide behind fiction. Like nobody necessarily knows what's real and what's not real unless I just choose to tell them that. Or, you know, you called my mom and asked her for the play-by-play, which she would have given probably if anybody had. But with the nonfiction or the memoir, whatever term we use to describe it, I'm not hiding behind fiction anymore. This really is what I'm trying to put down on the page is an accurate representation or recreation of my life and my thoughts. And I think for this book, and this is maybe, you know, feeds into the intimacy question, I didn't want to read any reviews of it. Like I didn't want to go on Goodreads. Like I didn't want to hear what anybody had to say, because it felt like if anyone was critical of this, they were going to be critical of me and not my plot, my dialogue, my character development. Like this is, if there was criticism about the book, it would be criticism about who I am as a person. And I think I just wasn't probably prepared for that. And so I just found that it was the vulnerability, it was the intimacy of the writing that was a new experience for me. But the only way that you're ever going to be connecting with people on any level is to put yourself out there and just hope that there is a connection, that people are able to relate in some way. Because if there's that safety distance between you and the reader, they're not going to have that same connection with the work. So I know I can speak for myself that being intimate in this book really pushed me out of my comfort zone, especially as in the realm of fiction. But I'm glad that I did it. I'm glad that I put myself out there, because I'm also 50 years old. I have to put myself out there at some point. You know, I at some point you have to sort of say, this is who I am, for better or for worse. This has been my life and these experiences.
Yeah, and I think again that's why I just keep on thinking of the word punk, right? Like that's why it's so radical, right? To be able to kind of and be at that moment, to be able to do that, right? Is incredible. And Ivan too, I love what you were kind of talking about in terms of rejecting the kind of labels of whether it's sort of memoir or nonfiction, right? And how does this kind of writing, how can it just kind of stand on its own? And do the work that it needs to do in terms of telling a story or reaching someone, right? So there's something so bare about that, which I really love. So thank you both for your beautiful answers. So maybe now we'll. Oh, I forgot to mention that for the attendees, the audience, if you have questions, please type them into the chat box, and we'll definitely have time towards the end of the event to address some of those questions. So please start populating your questions for Ivan and Brian into the chat box. But I think this is a good time to move into a reading. So I would love to hear Brian and Ivan read from their books. So maybe Brian, you would like to start us off?
Sure, thank you. I'm happy to read a section. So I figured, given that the title of today's event focused on body, I guess, or the word body, I would read a section that sort of talked about my own body or my challenges with my body growing up as a kid. One of the respondents that I respond to in this letter, his name is Dwayne, and Dwayne was a very muscular sort of fellow, and included photos to prove of himself, to prove how muscular he was, which obviously he thought was a selling point, and it was, but it just certainly was not something that I was comfortable with. Being around somebody like Dwayne and muscular guys in general just made me too self-conscious about my own body. So Dwayne was one of the ones I didn't respond to, even though maybe Dwayne thought that, you know, he certainly had a good sales proposition. And I think at the end of the day, he probably did. But in any case, this just sort of talks, this is my response to Dwayne, the bodybuilder. Sadly, Dwayne, you just weren't my type. Muscular guys made me too self-conscious about my own body. I was a fat kid, you see, over 200 pounds at 13 years old, specifically 203 pounds. That number had been scorched into my brain when someone said it out loud. weight's a funny thing. So long as no numbers are spoken, it's almost as if those numbers don't exist. There can be so much self-denial when it comes to weight. I don't mean your weight is something you can hide, although there are ways to camouflage it, but you can't escape your body, your physicality. It's always there, surrounding you, keeping you tethered. Denial can be the one coping mechanism getting you through the day. To be clear, it's not like I look in the mirror and see someone thin. It was more about not looking in the mirror in the first place, or believing that my weight was something fleeting, like a pimple. Maybe when I woke up the next day, I'd be thin, the sheets wet with the fat that had magically melted off during the night. I refused to let the magnitude of my weight sink in, because if I did, I'd have to face reality. And at 13, reality was no friend of mine. I had other troubles. Around that time, I developed gynecomastia, a condition in males where your estrogen and testosterone levels get all fucked up. Basically, you grow breasts. In my case, it wasn't so much breasts that were the problem. I was already top heavy in that department, as you can imagine, as it was my nipples. They puffed out. They went from looking like wrinkled raisins to the cherry red tips of badminton birdies, and they were very noticeable. Naturally, I was horrified. It was the absolute last thing an overweight, burgeoning homosexual needed. My rebellious nipples were yet one more secret I had to hide. I went to the doctor, who was pretty useless. Give it time, he said, my hormones would settle down. But I needed an immediate solution. I had to go to school the next day and the day after that. Warmer weather was on its way, and it would only be a matter of time before I had to trade in my jackets and sweatshirts for lighter, less forgiving clothing. So I came up with a solution on my own. I taped my nipples every day. At first, I used Scotch tape, but that didn't hold very well against my skin, especially when I perspired beneath my clothes. So I moved on to wrapping masking tape around my torso. It was awkward to do, and the binding around my chest meant I had to be careful not to take any deep breaths, but for the most part, it kept my secret safe. Isn't adolescence a batshit time? I mean, there I was, an overweight 13-year-old, wrapping masking tape around my body every morning, and never once did I stop to say, what am I doing? This is nuts. There was no questioning it, because to question it would have meant an admission of failure, of my failure as a boy. It would have meant bringing the monstrosity of me out into the open. And that was the last thing I needed. There is a strange solace to be found in the secrets we labor to keep, the rituals we perform, the pieces of ourselves we try to conceal under our clothing. So long as we're the only ones who know how screwed up we are, we feel safe. The universe will protect us, but we must be vigilant. If our secrets get out, if our true selves are revealed, we'll be rejected, reviled, humiliated. Whatever shreds of dignity we have left in our fat, taped up bodies will be trampled into the ground. I shouldn't complain too much. My nipple and weight issues ended up being fodder for my first book, Fruit. I wanted to reclaim that period of my life, to own that dysfunction for what it was, even if only through the pretense of fiction. And my protagonist had it worse. His nipples talked to him. I don't remember mine speaking. How could they under those layers of masking tape? So yes, there were body issues, Dwayne. I was closeted, overweight, and had puffy nipples. It was the unholiest of trinities. The weight, at least, was one thing I could control. My uncle, who had been overweight for most of his life, had gone to a hospital dietitian and lost over 100 pounds after trading in his Kentucky Fried Chicken for raw cabbage. He went from bringing my sisters and me bags of penny candy to packages of Trident. Bullshit, as far as I was concerned. He was a lifelong bachelor, and I think his weight loss represented a second adolescence, another shot at life. He'd show up at our house in jeans or sporting a purple faux fur fedora. And because I had always thought of my uncle as a bit of a joke in the way that relatives sometimes seem to teenagers, it bothered me that he had reached the other shore, where all the thin, happy people resided, whereas I was still stuck where I had always been, Jack Horner with my thumb and every other finger in the pie. My oldest sister, who was also overweight, was the first to follow in my uncle's footsteps. Soon after she went to the same dietitian, the dynamic in our household shifted. Our fridge was stocked with cans of Tab, the freezer loaded with boxes of lean cuisine, 4-cheese cannelloni, and sweet and sour chicken, the cupboards full of Sugar Twin and packages of Crystal Light iced tea mix. Now there was another traitor in our midst. While being overweight can be a lonely experience, there's solidarity in being around your fellow fatties. So long as you're all overweight, none of you are overweight. Don't ask me to explain the psychology. It wasn't long before I wanted a piece of the calorie-reduced pie, so I went to the hospital dietitian too. I remember sitting next to my dad in the waiting room, eyeing the other overweight people, comparing myself, taking inventory of everyone else's body, how my fat compared with theirs. 203 pounds. That was what the dietitian announced when I stepped on the scale. Her voice was so matter of fact. This was a woman who spent most of her days weighing fat people, after all. I'm sure I wasn't the largest 13-year-old she'd ever weighed. Or was I? A part of me waited for her to pick up the telephone. Hello, Guinness Book of World Records. You're not going to believe this, but I was ashamed, naturally. I hadn't stepped on our own bathroom scale in years. Hearing that number spoken aloud was like being thrown into a cold lake. My weight was an insurmountable obstacle, a mountain where the top wasn't even visible due to crowning clouds. After my weigh-in, the dietitian sat me down to review my eating habits. She set out rubber replicas of food on the table between us: a gray pork chop, a hard white pile of mashed potatoes, a bumpy mound of bright green peas. How much would you say you eat of this, Brian? I don't eat rubber peas. She tried to be encouraging. She told me that when her husband got a sundae, all she ever needed was a spoonful. I just need one bite and that's it, she said with a smile and a goofy shake of her curly hair. That's all I ever need. I immediately felt sorry for her. I was put on a plan outlined in a printed trifold brochure that I tacked onto the fridge. Everything was about portions. I'd need to weigh my food, cut wieners in half, drink water instead of Coke Slurpees. It was awful in the beginning, this self-control business, but I stuck to it because it was new and a challenge and something different for me. I wanted to be thin more than anything. Once my mind switched over, once I believed I could be good-looking, thin, and popular if I wanted it badly enough, there was no stopping me. I would become someone else, someone not me.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Brian. Evan?
Thanks, Brian. Well, I had one thing all picked out, and I listened. Heard Brian's, and I found another selection. I'm changing it up, and this is in response to a butch woman from Pakistan named Aisha. Although we changed her name upon her request, and so this is part of my response to her. I just read the poem you sent me again. Thank you for sharing it with me. I wish that I could read it in its original Urdu, but I read it out loud and I thought about who we are naked, without clothes to aid in constructing identity. There is a mirror next to my desk, which is in the bedroom where I sleep. Every morning when I get out of bed, I walk past that mirror, some days naked, some days wearing only boxer shorts, which are kind of an identity statement on their own, now that your song makes me think about it. I like my body more in the mornings than I do at night, for some reason. Do you remember in our emails way back when I wrote that I was recovering from a surgery? On June 3rd, 2013, her original letter had been written to me in 2013, and I had written her back a very short note and then the actual letters. On June 3rd, 2013, I had a radical double mastectomy, top surgery. After decades of struggling to feel right in this body of mine, I had my breasts removed. Next to quitting smoking cigarettes back in 2008, having top surgery was the single best thing I ever did for my health in my life. I passed my 7-year anniversary of that surgery this summer, and I did what I am now able to do every morning. Get up, put on a t-shirt, and go downstairs to make coffee. No bra, no binder, no constriction, just my t-shirt slipping over my skin. I am as happy in my body now as I have ever been since I was 10 years old or so, back before I realized that I was not pretty and that pretty mattered more than just about anything that a girl could be. I have moments now, mostly while in the water, where I forget to hate anything about this body I am in. I just read your letters again and then again. I found myself tearing up when I read your words about growing up in a world absent of any words that were not heteronormative, about feeling masculine in a feminist environment, about the nearly physical pain you experienced having to wear makeup and feminine clothing on stage in front of thousands of people. I'm not sure how old you are, but I am imagining tiny Butch you in Pakistan and tiny Butch me on the other side of the world in the Yukon, you confusing your Muslim mother and me confounding my Catholic one. What comfort we might have brought each other were I even to have spotted you, trailing along behind your mother and aunt and cousins on the street somewhere. I like to think we would have still recognized each other, even in our straight girl costumes. I know that being out of the closet is a privilege, and it is one that I do not take for granted. Thank you for reminding me that being able to be visibly butch or non binary in this world is also a privilege of a sort, too. It is easy to forget this when I'm being screeched at in a women's bathroom or with my heart pounding in the last stall in a men's washroom in an airport on the road somewhere. There are so many kinds of bravery, and not all of them are as easy to spot in a crowd as being butch is. I wish we had more words. I wish there was another word for not feminine than just the word masculine. I've never felt called to the word androgynous. I see this word as meaning ambiguous, and you and I both know that there is nothing at all ambiguous about being a masculine person in a body, in a body the world doesn't expect this of. I wish there was no line in the sand between the word butch and the words non-binary or trans. I look in the mirror every morning and I see something that fits none of these words and all of them simultaneously, but even still, I know that you are my sister. My younger sister is named Caroline. We call her Carrie for short. Several years ago, she was working in a hardware store in the paint department alongside a guy named Carl that I went to school with. Carl is one of a couple of boys I grew up with who came out of the closet after we all graduated. No one came out in high school in the Yukon back then. It just wasn't safe. Anyway, Carl and Carrie were chatting away at work one day when it was slow in the store, and she mentioned her sister. Carl got very terse with Carrie and explained to her that I was trans, didn't she know, and that she couldn't call me her sister anymore, and that I was her brother now, and she needed to just get it together and be respectful of my gender identity. Carrie took her coffee break and escaped to sit in her truck in the parking lot to have a cigarette. And she called me in tears. "What am I supposed to call you now?" she sobbed. "You've only ever been my sister. You never told me to call you anything else." I told her that I never asked her to call me anything but her sister because I'll never be anything but her sister. I told her that she and I get to decide what we call each other, not Carl, not the world, not anyone. So Aisha, my butch sister, I hope you get up in the morning and greet your naked self with nothing but love, and know that no matter what clothes you wear out the door and in front of that camera, that I can see exactly who you are, and that I know the truth of us both is found in the spaces between words and labels, not inside the words themselves. This is why labels peel off in the water. I remain your sister, Ivan.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much.
I haven't read that
uh,
one. That's one of the letters I haven't read at all. I
yeah.
just felt like it belonged with Brian's story a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for bringing it up and reading it for us. So I think both of the pieces that you read out just now sort of deal with the kind of bodies, the difficulty of bodies, the beauty of bodies. And one of the things that I noticed when I was reading both your books is the way in which you kind of write about the passage of time, right? The you write about sort of aging and sort of living through these different times and lives. So I'm just wondering if you might be able to comment a little bit on this sort of aspect of time and aging, and how it sort of enabled you or allowed you to kind of to write the book. I mean, it seems to me that these books, you know, could only have been written at this moment in time for you, right? So I'm just wondering if you know, if you can talk a little bit about that relationship to time and aging a bit. Brian, maybe you can start.
Sure. I know for myself, you know, when I look back on my life, I guess the big unraveling for me is understanding how growing up gay has had an impact on who I am as a person. And you know, I think I have a nephew and a niece who are both queer, and I'm glad that I was there for them as a role model for their lives. Like, I've always been out, and I never had that. And for me, it was also going back to a time of darkness. Like, it wasn't like, and I don't know if people really understand this, certainly of the younger generation, of what it was like. There was nothing. Like, there was no support. There was nobody was ever on team gay. Like it was just something that was not, you were immediately dismissed and cast aside. And I think growing up under that shadow, I don't think I've ever really realized how much it affected me. And I think through writing this book, it's helped me to understand this unraveling of understanding of who I am and how I see myself in very, very small ways too. Like, it's in the everyday thoughts that just kind of come into my head. Like, I've been so impacted, and I can be aware of it, but I also don't think I really fully understand how much it's impacted me. So I think I'm at a stage now where I'm able to see what's available for the younger generations. And I'm not saying it, and it certainly is extremely difficult for so many people. But there are so much more resources and help and awareness out there that I didn't have. And for me, I think for me, reaching this stage in my life, I'm realizing how much of myself I've kind of lost in some ways, but how much I've also gained through that understanding as well. But I can only sort of understand that loss by reflecting back. And I think many times for many queer people too, they don't want to look back. I don't want to go back into that darkness. I don't want to go back into that. I'm happy now in being out. But I think you have to sort of understand that darkness in order for you to understand the person that you are today. And I think I could only sort of have done that by going through the passage of time. And I have a happy story now, but it wasn't always a happy story, I guess. And again, I don't know if I've kind of answered that, but it's only having gone through those years that I understand and appreciate where I am today.
Yeah, oh, that's a huge question. Yeah, it's an interesting time to be a trans and non-binary person, I think, because I think we have this idea that trans people and non-binary are on the same timetable as queer people, or you know, the GLB. And I just don't think that that's true. So I feel like I came out as queer when I was, or as yeah, I think I came out as queer, I would say, you know, in 1988, you know, like right smack into the middle of the AIDS crisis. And I think that really, as I wrote Rebent Sinner, which I tracked down the Pantone for the ACT UP Silence Equals Death pink triangle, and that's the pink on Rebent Sinner, because those were my formative years. And my formative year, I came out literally into a massive health crisis that was deeply impacting my community, and I still think about everything that we lost and everyone that we lost, and its impact on the queer community and the arts community. I think about that a lot. And then I look at what's going on now today, and I feel like a lot of queer people, we've fought and gained so much in lots and lots of ways, but now we're having kind of, I feel like in trans politics, we're straight back to 1988. The conversations that people are having about, even within the queer community, about trans identity and non-binary people, there's so many of the same through lines, like the protect the children kind of, mentality. And what about the children mentality? So I feel like at the same time as trans and non-binary youth do have a lot more resources, and like Brian was saying, for sure. But I feel like there's back to intimacy for a second. There's something like, Brian, do you remember the first older gay man that you met that like told you anything or showed you anything, or like, because I sure do. I remember the older butches and the older lesbians that I first met, and there was kind of an unstated mentorship that was going on, and there was I don't know, we weren't big enough and free enough to turn on each other like we can right now. I'm not sure if I'm making any sense. Sometimes I worry that the youth have the queer and trans youth now have access to so many resources, but not a lot of real life three-dimensional support. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. For sure. Okay, I think we should, we're running a bit low on time, so I think let's move into some of the audience questions. So Lori has a question. Is there ever a point where you decide to have to draw the line in a personal story and choose not to share? What would cause this distinction? And thank you. Brian, you can start us.
Oh, that's in the Q&A.
It's the first year.
I think probably for me, it would just, if it served the story or didn't serve the story. I mean, there's lots of things that, happened to me, or lots of experiences that didn't make its way into this book. I mean, it's impossible to sort of pack your entire life into 250 pages or all those experiences. And so it's a curation of your life experiences, and all of that sort of feeds into the story, into the book. And so I guess, unless it was too painful for me to talk about, I would probably take out the things that maybe were interesting to me but didn't serve the ultimate purpose of the story that I was trying to tell. And so I guess that's part of the curation, is learning what to leave in, but what are the more important things to leave out, because it just doesn't serve the story in a meaningful way. I'm sure Ivan has thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I'm just looking at I'm reading the question again to make sure I've got it right. Yeah, there's many there's many points where I decide to draw the line in every personal story and choose not to share. There's so much for a multitude of reasons, whether it be the privacy of the other person, or whether it might be something that is too nuanced really to throw it to the dogs of the public in lots of ways, or it's something that's so true that it belongs in fiction, if you know what I mean. I think Brian probably knows what I mean. I think you probably do too, Vin. So yeah, there's all kinds of places where, there's all kinds of stuff that happens that I don't feel is a public personal story for lots of reasons, for sure. Yeah.
All right. So another question is, do you have any favorites or good examples of writing through with around correspondence and letters that you can recommend? I'll definitely look for each of your books and can't wait to read them. Thank you. Maybe Ivan can field this one first.
Lovingly, I'm really not a fan of questions like this. I feel like they always put me on the spot. I'd have to think about it. I'm definitely going to read Brian's book. I haven't yet. Full disclosure, I just haven't had time. I'm teaching right now, so I loved the reading. So I'll recommend Brian's book, and I would also recommend Google.
Thank you. the one book that comes to mind is not really a book of correspondence. It's a book called Found. I believe the person's name is Davey Rothbart. I think I've got a copy of it on my shelf. Yeah, Davey Rothbart. And it was like, I think he had a website at one time where he just collected notes and things that he had found, and he put them together in this book. And it's not correspondence, but it is a very raw and really, I don't know, it's something about found notes. And I mean, I guess maybe I have kind of mixed emotions about that, because I mean, people weren't necessarily consulted. Maybe I don't know how the collection of that book kind of worked, but it was the first time that I read something that was real, I guess, from real people. And it was a fascinating glimpse into people's lives, like letters from kids to their parents, or weird random things that I guess he had found and then collected together. So it's an interesting kind of look at just people in general and the whole idea of letter writing and note writing and just this mismatch. So yeah, Found was one of the ones that stuck out for me as a book of real writing, I guess you could say.
Yeah, one that's coming up to mind for me too, in sort of recent memory, is a novel by Ocean Vuong, where he writes it as sort of this letter to his mom, who won't ever be able to read it, right? Because she can't read English. And so the whole novel is structured as this, you know, this letter that is supposed to be addressed to one person, but the recipient will never read it, and so everyone else will read it, right? So and beautifully done as well. So yeah.
And that's On Earth We Are Briefly
Gorgeous.
Gorgeous.
Yeah, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous.
That's a good call, Vin. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't see that as, well, it is correspondence though. Yeah, that didn't pop to mind, but it is a beautiful book.
Okay, so did either of you engage in fact-checking process with the letters or other research involved in your books? For Ivan, I'd love to know more about the process of reaching out to the letter writers and how that went. What changes did you end up making to the manuscript afterwards?
Well, with the exception of the letter I wrote to my grandmother, they were all in response to real letters. And again, with the exception of S, who's anonymous, who there's a call out in the outro of the book for that person to get in touch with me, because I did contact everyone and seek their consent. And we had discussions about what details might need to be tweaked or changed for them, because they hadn't, written me with the intention or knowing that it would be in a book, and they were paid, and we had long discussions about name changes. My initial, because there's so many trans folks in there, my initial instinct was to change everybody's name. But I got some pushback from some of the letter writers. Sid Lepan, who's an old lesbian from the Sunshine Coast, was like, "No, I'm not changing my name. I'm Sid Lepan. It was unusual to be called Sid, and it's my name, and I can't think of any other name that I would rather blah blah blah." And so I was like, okay. And then it was Ace, the first letter, trans man, now just over 60, living in Alberta. And I said, I'm going to change your name. I was thinking of making you Spike. It has a similar vibe to Ace. What do you think? And he was like, "I've survived cancer 3 times. I'm not like you. I don't have however many books out. Like, this is my chance. I don't want my name changed. My name is Ace Admonson, and that's what I want it to be. And I don't want my name changed." And then I was like, wow, maybe I'm being paternalistic. And so we had ongoing conversations with everybody. And in terms of fact checking, they're writing about their personal lives, and I'm writing back about my personal life and answering their questions and responding. It's not like, other than the dates of things, I guess I did get one date wrong. Coming out day, I thought it was October 13th, but it was October 12th. So that was caught by an editor. Yeah.
I had some fact checking. I will just say, thank God I kept a journal at 21, like those coil bound ones, because it was great for me to go back and just, to be able to go back and say, this was the day that I came out to mom and dad. It was on this date, like to have, and that was important for me. I mean, I could say, well, I was 23 when I came out to them, but to know the date, to be able to go back and fact check that just for my own personal satisfaction, it was important for me. And I know for myself too, maybe this is the fiction thing coming through again, but I was very, if I couldn't remember something specifically, if I couldn't 100% guarantee it, at least to myself, I didn't include it in the book. Like I didn't want to fabricate any memories either for the sake of storytelling. Like I wanted to say, no, this happened and this was the date. And if I couldn't do it, then I wouldn't include it, because that's just me maybe being a bit anal about stuff. I don't know. But it was great for me to be able to go back to that journal and to go back to my 21-year-old self and do that fact checking to make sure how many letters was it? How many letters did I first receive after I placed the ad the next day, kind of thing. And so I was able to do, I didn't have like an extensive fact checking, binder or logbook or whatever, but it was at least something that I could go back to and just refer to and say, yes, this is when this happened, and try to be as accurate as possible. That was important to me too.
Thank you so much, Ivan and Brian, for your insights. We're running up on 4 o'clock. This has gone by super quickly. I have like so many more questions. So we could have kept on going. But thank you so much for your beautiful insights. And I'm really going to cherish both of these books, for the years to come. So thank you very much for being here. And I'll turn it over to Maha.
Thanks, Vin. Thank you, Ivan, Brian, and Vin. It was such a lovely and heartfelt talk, and I really enjoyed listening to you talk about your letter writing journal. In closing, I would like to remind all our viewers that the writers' books are available for purchase online from Wordsworth Books. Visit our online book table for a handy overview of all our festival authors' books. Don't forget that the next Wild Writers Literary Festival event is the publication process, Writer, Editor, and Agent Connect, which is tomorrow, Sunday, November 7th at 1 p.m. Thank you all for attending tonight's session.
Can't wait to read your book, Brian.
Thank you, Ivan. And I picked up